What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Arrow Season 8, Episode 6, titled Reset. Now, this episode is definitely very different for what I expected. You probably, if you saw my trailer breakdown, you probably already know this, but what I expected is for this to be an episode like Invasion, obviously not with the Dominators or the actual alien invasion or the crossover, but the second episode where Oliver and a couple other characters who debuted on Arrow were all put in this dream world by the Dominators. I thought it would be very similar, where it's the same thing, but instead of it being used against them, this would be for Oliver's benefit, as the Monitor would try to show him something. Now, the Monitor showing him something was correct, which was pretty obvious. I mean, why else would Oliver be put there? But it's not really a dream world. There is a part of that where it's the real world. I mean, Oliver's world, but Quentin is alive, so there is that one difference. But there's a lot more to that in this episode. It's not just a dream world, it's also a time loop, which is something that I didn't expect at all, and it's something that the Arrowverse has done twice before with Legends of Tomorrow in the Here I Go Again episode, where it focuses on Zari and the Wave Rider being destroyed. Then there's Cause and Excess from The Flash Season 5, which was the second year in a row where we had a time loop episode in the Arrowverse, where Nora was stuck in this self-imposed time loop where she kept time traveling an hour to the past to save Team Flash, or members of Team Flash, from being killed by Cicada. But now, in the third year in a row, the Arrowverse has another time loop episode, this time on Arrow, a show that I never really expected to have an episode like this one, because up until the latest season, Arrow has had nothing to do with any of these time travel or multiverse related stuff or cosmic stuff. It's just a powerless guy who can shoot a bow and arrow, who can fight really well. But then there was like some magic here. I guess there was also magic. But anyway, it wasn't until Arrow Season 8 where Oliver went to another universe. His future children came back to the present day, and he was told that he would have to save the multiverse, or he would have to help save the entirety of the multiverse. So it fits Arrow Season 8 for them to do a time loop episode. But also I can say without a shadow of a doubt that this is the best time loop episode the Arrowverse has ever had, as it is significantly better than the other two, Here I Go Again and Cause and Excess, for so many reasons. But with that in mind, let's begin my review for Arrow Season 8, Episode 6, which I guess up until now has also been a part of the review. But for this review, I'll go day by day, because that's really the structure of this episode. It's 7 different days, and I'll just go each one at a time. So, day 1, Oliver wakes up at home, or his former home, and realizes things are a little bit different, as in the last episode he confronted Lila about working with the Monitor, and that's the last thing he remembers. But then his future children and Connor tell him that things happened since then, that Lila explained to them that he was, or she was, a double agent, which actually we learn later, but things happened since then, which Oliver doesn't remember. So he realizes certain things are wrong, which is very evident once he meets Quentin, who died in Season 6, which is really the only, homage in this episode. This episode has no homages whatsoever, while the first 5 episodes had a significant amount, and the next episode will also have a significant amount. This episode, which had some very minor homages to Season 6, like Laurel and Quentin's relationship, or the mentions of Quentin's death, most of it didn't really have any homages to anything. In spite of this, however, this is most likely the best episode, or at least on par with the best episodes of this season, because it just does the time loop concept and what it's trying to do so well. So this invasion-like dream world, which is what I expected the entirety of the episode to be, and also I did not expect Laurel to have a very large role at all, changes into a time loop, which also later changes to very much including and focusing on Laurel, when Green Arrow and Quentin try to take down this guy who's taking hostages and demands to see the mayor, who is Quentin, and this ends with their deaths, with Quentin and Oliver's death, or at least Quentin's death. It's not clear if Oliver died, but it is clear that Quentin either died or Oliver thought he did. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really have to be that technical. Like, Oliver thinks Quentin died, so that's fine. The Monitor will probably then reset the day. But anyway, day 2, Oliver wakes up and starts the day over again. This is when it changes into a time loop, which was so surprising. Like I said, I thought this would be a just full-on dream episode like Invasion, but once it turned into a time loop, that was such a crazy twist. And I mean, it wasn't insane or anything, but it was still definitely very surprising, and I'm definitely glad they did this, because they've already done a Dreamworld episode in Invasion, and they kind of already did that in this season with Starling City, where this like Earth 2 is this kind of Dreamworld, and it's very similar. So I'm glad they took a different route here, and instead did something that Arrow has never done before in a time loop. So with Day 2, they dodged a lot of time loop tropes. Typically, Day 2 is the day where the person who is in the time loop has to go through this transitional period from Day 1 being normal, where they die, and then Day 3, where they realize they're in a time loop and where they try to cope with that and try to get out of it. Day 2 is typically a transitional period, but here in this episode, it isn't at all. Day 2 is the episode where Oliver just straight up realizes that he's in a time loop, which again is a trope dodge. And also Day 2 is when Oliver just straight up talks to Quentin about him being in a time loop, which is when Quentin straight up believes him, which could be because the Monitor wants to push them together on this mission, and this isn't actually Quentin, it's the Monitor really puppeting him. But anyway, I really like that trope dodge of a character who on a superhero show typically not believing things, even though they've seen crazy things like aliens and metahumans and magic and even time travel. A time loop is something that I feel like they wouldn't believe, so Quentin believing him right away is a great trope dodge, along with the earlier one I mentioned of Day 2 just being the day where Oliver realizes he's in a time loop because of everything Oliver has been through, especially lately. Also in Day 2, Oliver finds Laurel as he's trying to stop the bomb, which killed him and Quentin, or seemingly killed those two in the last episode. He finds Laurel, which is when we learn that Laurel's also stuck in this time loop, which is not something I've seen very much of, two people both being stuck in the same time loop. But this also suggested that it wasn't Oliver's death that reset things, because Laurel isn't connected to Oliver's time loop at all, or like they didn't meet up then, so why would Oliver's death reset her for Laurel too? And then we learn that it isn't Oliver's death, it's Quentin's. Quentin is shot and dies, and that's when we get to Day 3. Not really much happens in Day 3. Oliver does realize that Quentin's death is what triggers the reset, and also Laurel has a talk with Quentin. Laurel's talk with Quentin is actually pretty, or at least a little bit emotional, but not as emotional as the one we get later in, I think it's Day 5. Anyway, Lila kills Quentin in the end in a very, very cool moment. Lila has just been so much better in this season than before. Not that she's been a bad character before, but she just got so much more interesting where with her connection to the Monitor, and in this episode, she's legitimately really cool. But anyway, then we move on to Day 4. Day 4 is easily the worst day of this episode. No, wait, I'm thinking of Season 4, I'm thinking of Arrow. Anyway, Day 4 is actually pretty decent. In fact, it's actually one of the better days as it focuses on Black Canary and her reasoning for being in this time loop and how she gets out of it. Green Arrow and Black Canary stop the bomb and manage to actually get a lead on who hired the bomber, but Quentin dies anyway. Laurel does get to say her goodbyes and even tells him that she became a better person because of him. She became a superhero and the Black Canary because of him, which is what she realizes she was there for. We learn later that this was a reward from the Monitor for Laurel not betraying Oliver, which I will get to more in depth in once I actually get to Day 7, where that's mentioned. But for now, Day 4 is really good, and the final scene between Quentin and Laurel is definitely pretty emotional, and that's the end of Laurel's arc in this episode, which was, I think, done very well. So in Day 5, Oliver talks to Lila about Mar-Novu, and in this scene, Lila clearly has a lot of faith in Novu. She has the exact same personality that she had before, which I'm glad, because like it would have been weird if they changed her personality. It just feels like she's been the same person she has been this entire time, but also she's been working with Mar-Novu. But this is also a pretty good scene. Then we see Oliver and Quentin go to the employer of the bomber, which Oliver learned about in the last day, and Green Arrow in this incredible fight scene, faces off against all these faceless hordes in this single shot fight scene, which is by far the best type of fight scene, something that Daredevil perfected and Arrow has done a lot recently, like most evidently in the Slabside Redemption episode, where they have these fight scenes where they never cut away, or when they do, it's a trick and you can't really tell that it's a cut, which I think they did once in this scene where there's this explosion, it focuses on the blast and the light, and then it goes in on another shot. It's definitely a cut there, but it's barely noticeable, and it still feels like a single shot fight scene, which, like I said, is definitely the best type of fight scene. So this is an awesome fight scene in this episode. But obviously, Oliver's efforts of getting through the day and saving Quentin are all for naught, as Quentin is shot yet again and ends up giving up his life. But before that, Oliver realizes why he's here. The final scene between Quentin and Oliver here in this day is pretty emotional. The music is really, really good, and Quentin dies yet again, which is when we go to day 6, where Oliver acts on his realization, where in day 5 he realized that the reason he's here is because he can't save Quentin, and similarly, he can't save himself. So, day 6, Oliver wakes up yet again, now realizing that the Monitor was trying to, what the Monitor was trying to show him. He talks to the future Team Arrow as if his death is certain, which up until this point he hasn't believed in, but now he does, which kind of changes my whole perspective on what Oliver has been doing up until this point. Ever since he started going up against the Monitor, it just felt like he just believed that the Monitor was lying to him, and he believed that the Monitor was evil, so he believed also that he could stop him. But what it really was is that Oliver was in denial of his impending death. He thought he could stop his death, and the only really real way for him to grasp at that idea is through the Monitor, because his death was going to be at the hands of the Anti-Monitor probably, and the Anti-Monitor isn't around yet at all, so the Monitor was really the only way for Oliver to grasp at that idea, which is why he saw the Monitor as a threat and why he saw the Monitor as the enemy. But now, realizing his death is certain, he changes his opinion on the Monitor, which I think is such a great arc over the course of these episodes. It was getting a little bit annoying for Oliver to continually think the Monitor is a villain, because we all knew that he wouldn't end up being a villain. Like, there wouldn't be this great twist, because the Monitor is good, the Anti-Monitor is bad, or at least the Monitor is neutral. He's not a villain at all. However, now with this episode, it completes that arc, and it was such a good arc, because it wasn't about the Monitor, it was about Oliver, and I think they pulled that off so well. But Oliver talks to Quentin and asks him why Quentin stopped trying to capture him. This was back in season 1, and instead embraced him as a hero. Quentin tells him it was because of his daughters, though Sarah wasn't really around yet. It was more about Laurel at that point, but I guess that was reinforced by Sarah in season 2, and though that did kind of fall apart in season 3, that was brought back yet again in season 4, 5, and especially, I think, 6. And I guess this is as good a time as any to say that seeing Quentin back is always really great, which, I mean, I realize to say always, but we really haven't gotten that at all since his death, other than in a cameo in a documentary episode. What I meant to say is that seeing Quentin at all, except for, actually no, he's probably one of the most consistently great characters on this show, so seeing him in any season is really good, but seeing him here, where it's mainly focused on his death and the relationship between Oliver and Quentin, it's really, really great. But day 6 ends with Oliver talking to Lila, which honestly, it would have been so much better if this was the Monitor. Well, yes, Lila has had this presence throughout this episode. I really, really would have liked it if right here Oliver turns around and the Monitor was there, because this was one of the only episodes of the season where the Monitor didn't show up at all, and it really would have been cool to see him here at the end of Oliver's reset test, his time loop test. But still, though, this scene between Oliver and Lila, where Oliver yet again fully realizes what the Monitor was trying to show him, that he can't change his death, was also a really good scene. Day 7 isn't really a part of the time loop because it's its own day. It's going to be when the next episode takes place in, but still, I'm counting it as a new day because Oliver wakes up and it is technically a different day probably than the others. Like, I don't know if it's the same date or whatever. Anyway, Oliver and Laurel wake up in a tent. Oliver tells Laurel that Novu put Laurel in there as a reward for not betraying Oliver, or at least that's what he assumes, which is when we learn that Oliver again realizes that the Monitor is good, which, like I said, I'm glad that storyline has ended, and I really like how they ended it. I also really like that Laurel was rewarded for not betraying Oliver, because this confirms that the Monitor telling Laurel to betray Oliver was a test for Laurel, and even though it doesn't seem like Laurel's gonna appear in the Crisis, which is a little weird, especially when you consider the setup in this season, I guess it was still pretty cool for her to be given this test by the Monitor for probably the Crisis, but at least given this reward. Anyway, Team Arrow, or Oliver and Laurel, then find future Team Arrow and Diggle. They all find themselves on Lian-Yu. So in conclusion, this episode is really, really good. It uses the time loop concept way better than the other 2 episodes of the Arrowverse that have done it so far, and this is probably the second best time loop, or maybe third best time loop related thing I've seen. The best would definitely be Edge of Tomorrow, which it seems like me and Laurel both agree is a pretty great movie. Second would probably be the premiere of season 4 of Rick and Morty, but this is, I think, a close third. But anyway, this is a great episode, and I'll give it a 9.6 out of 10, as I think it's practically on par with the first episode of this season, which, while it did have flash forwards, I also think that the alternate universe is a more interesting concept than a time loop, so that kind of balances the scales, making this episode and that episode the best episodes of the season so far. But if you take the averages between this episode and the Flash, you get a 9.75 out of 10 in this week, which is, like, this is such a great week for the Arrowverse. But let me know your thoughts about this episode in the comments down below, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.